Well, we are picking up this morning where we left off a couple weeks ago, sermon series from 1 Peter, the New Testament book called 1 Peter. And if you've been with us, you know that the title is called In the Trenches. And if you haven't been with us, you may be asking, well, what is the deal with the title? Well, basically, if you can imagine you're driving your car down the road and you go off the road, you're down in a ditch, you're down in a trench, okay, and your wheels are spinning, you can't get out. Well, that's sort of the idea here, that spiritually speaking, the believers that the Apostle Peter is writing to are just really in this pickle because their culture looks down on them. People make fun of them. Nobody understands this obsession with Jesus, and the Roman government is actually persecuting them. So spiritually speaking, they've gone off the road. They're down in the trench. They don't know how to be faithful anymore. And so they basically ask Peter, hey, what is the deal? How can we live the Christian life in this hostile environment? People hate us. And so Peter writes this letter, and he's been very, very encouraging if you've been with us. But Peter's also been pretty direct, hasn't he? Pretty blunt, and he's all along he's been saying this kindly, encouraging them. I know you're having a difficult time, but you still need to be faithful. Still need to be faithful in all areas of life. It doesn't give you an excuse just because you're being persecuted. Still have to be faithful, okay? And he's going to continue that theme today. He's going to talk a lot about faithfulness. But the context today is going to be being faithful when it comes to suffering. As a matter of fact, and this is a really big thought today, okay, but he's going to make this point right off the bat that suffering should be expected. If you're a Christian and if you want to live a godly life in Christ Jesus, you will be persecuted, okay? And that's a really big thought for us to sort of wrestle with today. But in the midst of doing the will of God, of being faithful, and we are suffering because of our faith, people are making fun of us, people are mocking us, whatever. How do we survive that? What is the secret to coping, to surviving that persecution because we're Christians? And in fact, you know what? I'll just tell you what the secret is. The priority is to love one another, is for other Christians to love and encourage and support those of us who are currently being persecuted for our faith. Because once again, if you're a Christian, you need to expect to be persecuted. That is, if you want to be faithful, okay? And since that is the case, we need that priority. We need the love and encouragement of other people in order to survive. And, I've mentioned this before, probably actually several times over the years, but when I first became a Christian, people in my family and people at work and some of my friends, they really didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. As a matter of fact, I was just under fire no matter where I went, but actually particularly at home. There was one person in particular who just badgered me to no end. And thinking back, I don't think I could have survived without the love and support of a really good friend. We would meet pretty much almost every week. We were kind of weird. We would go up to church and meet like 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30, whatever it was. And we would pray for the leadership of the church. We'd pray for the church, and then we would pray for each other as well as our families. And without question, my friend, every Tuesday morning, he would ask me, so Chris, how's it going with so-and-so? Are you losing your temper? Are you keeping, are you hanging in there and all those things? And I would tell him, what the latest development was. And sometimes he'd offer advice, and other times he would just listen. But every single time he would end up praying for me. And I have these vivid memories of him just putting his hand on my shoulder, and I'm just beaten down. I'm almost in tears sometimes. And he'd put his hand on my shoulder and he would pray these powerful prayers for me. And I tell you what, without his love, without his encouragement, I don't think I would have survived being, persecuted, even within my own family all those years. The first couple years were really, really difficult. And that's what we're going to talk about today. That's going to be Peter's point. Again, number one, if you're a Christian, like it or not, suffering goes with the territory. That is, if you're going to be faithful, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, actually a lot about that. And how do we survive? What is the priority? Well, the priority, when we're suffering, we need the love and encouragement of other Christians. So that's where Peter's going to talk with us about today. So, who needs to listen to this sermon? Well, number one, are you here today? Are you being persecuted for your faith? Are you getting grief at school or at work or on your sports team? Maybe you're at the point where, you know what, I don't know if this is really worth it. Well, if that's sort of how you're feeling today, I understand that feeling, but today, hopefully, will help you, okay, in order to cope. Also, if you're here today, maybe not only are you wondering, is this even worth it to be a Christian? I mean, gosh, people at work hate me. The kids at school hate me. Maybe you're at the point where you're wondering if you can even survive anymore. Well, I'm telling you, you are in the right place today. And finally, if you're here today and maybe you're not being persecuted for your faith, nobody's abusing you because you follow this dead guy called Jesus, okay? But maybe you know somebody. Maybe you know somebody who is being persecuted for their faith, and maybe you've sort of wondered, well, I wish I could help so-and-so. I know that they're having a tough time, but I don't know how to help. I don't know what to do. Well, by the time we're through today, you will know how you can practically, concretely help them, okay? And just one final word here. If you're here, and particularly if you're not being persecuted for your faith this morning, you might be sitting here thinking, man, well, why did I even come here today? And I had an extra hour's sleep, all right, but, why am I even here? I'm telling you, I say again, if you are a Christian and if you want to be faithful, you will be persecuted. And so if you think this topic is not important to you, you just wait, my friend, because if you want to be faithful, sooner or later you're going to run into resistance. So this is a big topic, and it is important. So please don't sleep, okay? You've had the extra hour sleep. So here we go. 1 Peter chapter 4 is where we're going to be. So let me hear those Bibles. I want to hear the rustling of paper, fake me out, just rustle some paper, make me think that it's a Bible, like you're really doing that, okay? 1 Peter chapter 4. Now, the first part of this passage, he's going to basically tell these believers that they may need an attitude adjustment. And specifically, he's going to tell them, you need the same attitude as Christ when it comes to suffering, okay? And then along the way, he's also going to do something really kind of interesting, I think. And I've never seen it as clearly as I've seen it now, but he's also going to remind his readers, here's a really strong reason why you're getting some abuse because you're a Christian. And so it's a really interesting insight. And the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll just shut up about that, but when I was first a Christian and when I was being persecuted by even people in my own family, I would read 1 Peter over and over and over again, and particularly here in chapter 4, because these verses, these were my life verses, and I hung on to them for every ounce that I had. So anyway, that didn't make any sense, but here we go, beginning in verse 1. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in his body is done with sin. As a result, he does not live the rest of his earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. They think it strange that you do not plunge with them into the same flood of dissipation, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to men in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit. Now, I don't know about you, but there's a couple of hard-to-interpret verses here, verse 1 and verse 6, and we'll deal them. But let's start with verse 1. Again, it's very hard to interpret, but to me, the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it and prayed about it and studied it, I think the key for me is to focus on the first half of verse 1 and then get that, and then you can understand the second half of verse 2. So in a nutshell, here's what I've concluded regarding verse 1. I think his point is that, Jesus suffered because he was determined to do the will of God, and we will suffer as well. And we should have the same attitude as Jesus. In other words, we should expect to suffer because we're Christian. if we are faithful, if we're determined to do the will of God, just as Jesus was, then suffering goes with the territory, okay? I think that's having the same attitude as Christ. Well, you know what? I'm a Christian, and if I want to be faithful, just as Jesus was faithful, he suffered, and by golly, then I'm probably going to suffer as well. And you know what? I don't like that, but I accept it, okay? So that's having the same attitude as Christ. And then the second half of verse 1, I think his point is that once we've gotten to that point, in other words, once we accept, well, I don't like it, but I accept the fact that I'm going to suffer. I accept the fact that people are going to persecute me. I accept the fact that the kids at school, that the people at work, that people in my family are not going to like me. They're not going to agree with me. They're going to give me abuse because of Jesus. I accept the fact that I'm going to suffer. And then the second half of verse 1, I think his point, and you can disagree with me, but I think his point is once we've reached that decision, we basically say, I wash my hands of sin. I'm not going to live for my earthly desires anymore. I accept the fact that I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'm going to do the will of God. And you know what? If I'm going to suffer because of it, well, so be it. I accept it. I don't like it, but I accept it. It's reality. I'm just going to be faithful, and I'm not going to live for my earthly desires. I'm going to live for the will of God. That is, I think, what he's saying in verse 1. And this powerful verse, and maybe you've heard it before, but 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12. Ooh, I wish this verse wasn't here, but it is here. He says, in fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. So which Christians will be persecuted? Everyone. That is, if you want to live a godly life, if you're serious about your faith, if you really love Jesus, if you really follow Jesus, if you're really committed, if you're really faithful, then you will be persecuted. It's not if, it's going to happen. You can expect it. It happened to Jesus. It's going to happen to us as well.